Terror on a train. What should have been a safe journey from Doncaster to London's King's Cross ended with armed police rushing the platform after a knife attack on board.
There was a girl next to me who was near where the first stabbings happened, and she said that the man on the floor stepped in front of her and then got a stab to the neck.
This is Huntingdon Station live this morning, where the authorities are starting to investigate what on earth went on. We'll be live on the ground and bring you everything we know so far. And what next for the former Prince, the Palace and the politicians? With us in the studio this morning, John Healey, the Defence Secretary, and Zia Yusuf from Reform UK. Morning. My team at the desk for the next hour this week: Valentine Lowe, royal author and journalist, broadcaster Jeremy Vine, and the leader of the Unison Union, Christina McAnee. But let's get straight on, as we always do, with what's making the news today. There was a scramble late last night for the papers to update their editions after the attack, but the Sunday Telegraph splashes with horror on a train. The Sunday Times leads on the 2 arrests that have been made. But the embarrassment of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor still features on the front of The Sun on Sunday and the Sunday Mirror, demanding more answers on his link with Jeffrey Epstein. But the Observer looks ahead to the big climate summit coming. Good cop, bad cop is their headline. And we will hear from the UK's new climate chief later on in the programme. And the Sunday People leads on the Defence Secretary's new promise of homes for heroes. We'll speak to him later. But the big headline everywhere now is the huge emergency response after terror on the 6:25 Doncaster to London King's Cross. An hour into the journey as a man ran through the carriages, stabbing innocent passengers. Eyewitnesses told us they all packed forward in the train to try to flee the attack, fearing for their lives. Ollie Foster, one of the passengers, told the BBC how an older man protected a young girl and was hurt himself.
There was a girl, bless her, who was really in a bit of a state because the guy had actually tried to stab her, and one of the older guys, was an absolute hero, blocked it with his head, and he's got this like gash. He had this gash on his head. He's got I think a gash on his neck, and he's we're giving him like a jackets to keep the pressure on the blood.
Well, the train made an emergency stop at Huntingdon, where armed police stormed down the platform. One witness says they tasered a man and 2 people have been arrested and are being held in custody. But 10 people are in hospital, 9 of them with injuries that threaten their lives. The British Transport Police say that counter-terrorism officers will join an investigation as they work to establish the full circumstances and the motivation. Let's go straight to Huntingdon and speak to the Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, Paul Bristow. Thanks very much for making time to speak to us on a busy morning. What can you tell us about the nature of the attack, Paul?
Well, it's a truly horrendous incident, Laura. And before I say anything, I just want to commend the work of the emergency services, the first respondents, Cambridgeshire Constabulary, the local British Transport Police, and of course the train crew who responded amazingly by stopping here at Huntingdon. Look, it's a horrendous incident. Facts are still waiting to come out. I think the British Transport Police are going to issue a statement shortly, but everyone here is reeling from what is a truly horrendous incident.
A huge shock for the community there and the people that you represent. But can you give us any information on how the 10 people in hospital are?
Well, I think 9 of them have life-threatening injuries. We're fortunate to be so close to a wonderful hospital at Addenbrooke's, and so I think it's only half an hour away. I think they were airlifted to Addenbrooke's, or certainly transported there very quickly, and I'm sure getting the best possible treatment that they can get. It's worth pointing out that the train, in the main, because it stopped to Peterborough, was travelling through Cambridgeshire and didn't intend to stop at Huntingdon, so local people will be concerned, but the train was never intending to stop at Huntingdon. So I'm hoping that this morning we'll begin to see more information released in a controlled way, but in a very open and transparent way, so we can begin to reassure residents again for what's a truly horrendous incident.
And do you have any indication, as one of the political leaders of that area, from the police that they are in a position to give us significant new information, or are you expecting just an update on what we know so far that of course we'll bring live if it happens while we're on air?
Well, it's been led by the Transport Police, because this, of course, took place on a train, which is, a horrendous enclosed environment. So again, the train crews did a fantastic job stopping at Huntingdon. It's not being led by the Cambridgeshire Constabulary, but I believe they helped enormously with yesterday's truly heroic response to this incident. But it's a British Transport Police matter, and they'll be releasing information, I think, any time now.
And can you tell us anything about the involvement of counter-terror police at this stage?
Yes, well, I think they're on site. I think they're here. They're certainly advising the British Transport Police. I think initially on Operation Plato was initiated. That's a very serious incident, but I think they've slightly rode back from that now. So we're still waiting to find details as they come forward.
Paul Bristow, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And of course, if we get that live information, if that comes to us from police, we'll bring that to viewers live. Good morning to the three of you. Jeremy, this is a truly dreadful event.
Absolutely terrible. The last point the Mayor made, I think, is really crucial, because I saw last night they'd gone in under something called Plato, which is for a marauding terrorist attack. And then the Plato terminology was rescinded, which suggests that they thought it wasn't that. But I think we're almost into that vacuum now, where we need to know who and why as quickly as possible. I've already been online. You don't even want to know what people are saying on social media about it. And they have to close that off. So we're left with so many questions. And of course, these just concerns for the people affected. It's awful. You can imagine enclosed space, rammed, nowhere to go, and then someone starts stabbing people.
And stories too also of heroism coming out already from how some passengers tried to protect each other. But on that point of trying to be transparent, Valentine, how important do you think it is for the authorities to tell us as much as they possibly can, as soon as they possibly can?
Well, we saw with Southport, it's incredibly important, because when there's a vacuum of information, all sorts of stuff spreads online, rumours, misinformation. We saw the riots that happened there, so it's incredibly important to act quickly.
Christina, what's the balance, though, do you think, for the authorities here?
Well, it's that wanting to give information, but also obviously they have operational issues to deal with in terms of their investigation. But I think I would agree with everything that's just been said. I mean, there is intense speculation out there in social media, and it's really unhelpful. But can I also just say I think a huge thank you to the emergency services, the police and the ambulance staff who were involved in this, and of course the staff at Addenbrooke's who will be dealing with it.
OK, all three of you will be back with you a bit later in the show. The Prime Minister has said that this is an appalling incident, in his words, and he said that the whole thing is deeply concerning. We can bring you also the reaction of the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. She said she's deeply saddened, and she has urged people to avoid comment and speculation at this early stage. So let's get the very latest concrete information from the Defence Secretary, John Healey, who's with us this morning. Welcome to you.
Good morning.
Let's begin then with the victims here. Can you give us more information of the condition of those people in hospital?
The reports we've had say that 10 people are in hospital, 9 of them are very seriously injured, and our thoughts are with them and their immediate families. And this has been shocking and very close to home for me. I was on that very service with my wife Jackie yesterday, just a few hours before the attack. It's a line I use every week to get home to Rotherham. And I pay huge tribute to the passengers, but also the emergency services for the way they responded, because this might have been so much worse if they hadn't acted in the way that they did.
As Jeremy mentioned, and we've reported here at the BBC, that the code word Plato, which signifies a terror attack, was used at the scene and then it was withdrawn. Was this a terror attack?
Well, the details are still emerging. The investigation is going. It's an early stage. And so it's not helpful for me to speculate. The counter-terrorism police are supporting the investigation that's being led by the local police, and I know that they will let us, the public, have as much information as soon as they can. And for now, the early reports suggest this was an isolated incident. So from the public's point of view, there's no reason not to go about our normal business, continue travelling, and I'll be using the LNER line back up to Doncaster later this week.
And in terms then of the government's position, you're either not ready to say it is a terror attack or you simply don't know?
The investigation's still going on. That's a matter for the local police, supported by the counter-terrorism police. As soon as they have the information, they will let us know as much as they can, as soon as they can, and I'm confident that's what they'll do. And
is that important to you then as a government, that early transparency, that early information for the public to stop any wild speculation taking off?
Well, I think we've seen in the recent one or two attacks, local police doing just that. I would expect this to happen again. I know they'll give us that information as soon as they can. OK,
and a reminder, we may get an update from the police while we're on air this morning, and we'll bring that to our viewers live if that happens. Just on a wider point, do you think that the government ought to increase safety on trains? After the attacks in 7/7, there was then a government trial of bringing in security scanners at stations. Is that something you think the government would like to look at?
Not immediately. I think what this says to us all as the travelling public is be vigilant, look out for each other. But the British public are pretty resilient, and I think we have to wait to see what the facts of this attack are, the assessments they make as the investigation proceeds, and if there are any wider policy conclusions that we need to draw, then the government will do that. OK,
let's talk then about your huge job as Defence Secretary. Now you are this week making a big announcement about military housing, which everyone watching will know for many years has sometimes been in an absolutely dreadful state. In the spring, you wrote to your chiefs, the military chiefs, saying that the MOD estate was too big and too expensive, and that the land was going to have to be used for the wider benefit of the public. But you also said there'd be costs and trade-offs for the MOD. So what are the costs and trade-offs for the MOD?
Well, first of all, what we're launching tomorrow is a defence housing review, a strategy review, and this will be the biggest commitment and change to forces housing for 50 years. And people have already seen us acting as a government. After 6 months, we ended the worst ever Tory privatisation and brought 36,000 military homes back into public ownership. And today I'm confirming that we're going to invest over the next decade £9 billion to bring those homes up to scratch. And at the same time, as you've seen there, supercharge the ability to build new homes on defence land, homes that will be for military personnel and veterans as well as everyone else. And this is what I mean by better use of public land, but for public benefit, not the sort of Tory fire sale that we've seen in the past.
But how much land is the Ministry of Defence going to have to give up?
Well, the the Defence Ministry, we own over 1% of the whole landmass. So for me, military purposes, first and foremost, but we have surplus land that we've been too slow to declare as surplus, too inefficient at making sure that we can build new homes, put it to other purposes that help the government's priorities. And so the plan that I'm putting in place now that could see over 100,000 homes built on surplus land, with forces first at the heart of that. So in other words, for military personnel and veterans, priority over purchase of those new homes, and receipts from those developments recycled into building more for the future.
But if you're really putting the forces first, why might it take as long as 10 years to get this done? I mean, this isn't a new problem. It's something you spoke about in opposition. You've already been in power for well over a year. Why is it going to take you another 10 years to sort it out?
Well, this is one of the biggest, most ambitious housing programmes ever. In full, it will take time. But I tell you, I'm hugely ambitious to get as much done in this Parliament. You can have me back on your programme before the election and hold me to account for that. But we're launching the strategy tomorrow. We're already underway with the action necessary. So, for instance, in Bryce Norton, we've got plans and the go-ahead for several hundred homes. Diggers will be in the ground in January. In Feltham, I've already struck the deal with the London Mayor and the local council, and we will put forces first for the new homes that are built there.
But there are some
and right across the country, there are opportunities for building homes, both for military and for everyone else, that will drive economic growth and boost our house building numbers that we need.
But one report even this week said at one military base, RAF Marham, there wasn't even always hot water. I mean, don't you have to get on with fixing this as soon as possible? And it's one thing to say this is your long-term ambition, but right now, if there are forces family that turn on a tap and they can't even get hot water, that's a scandal, isn't it?
The scandal of forces housing has existed for the last 14 years, and that's what I'm determined to fix. It's what we're announcing in the review tomorrow, and this will mean 40,000 family military homes upgraded in the years ahead. We've already started on the 1,000 worst homes, and we'll see a likely 14,000 rebuilt anew, because this is what people deserve. They make huge sacrifices that you and I will never make to serve our country. I was with submariners last month, coming back after months of patrol on our nuclear submarine, no contact with families for the entire time. Last week I was with those on the ground staff that keep our Typhoons flying in Qatar for the Middle East. And there was a woman there who had been deployed at 2 weeks' notice for 4 months, including over Christmas, leaving 2 children behind. Now, the very last thing our forces deserve is to worry about their families, wives, husbands, kids back home in damp, leaky, cold homes. We will put an end to that scandal. We started already, and we'll do it over this period ahead.
What members of the military also don't want to have to worry about is having the right kit or having enough equipment or having to deal with vehicles or weapons that aren't the very latest and that aren't up to scratch and that they may feel are not getting the kind of maintenance that they require because simply there's not enough money to go around. The former Chief of the Defence Staff, Tony Radakin, who stepped down very recently, said that further cuts are likely to be required in the short term to the Ministry of Defence. Is he wrong?
He's wrong about the defence budgets. I mean, this is a government that has made the biggest commitment to increasing defence spending since the end of the Cold War.
That's the overall budget. That's different to saying there might have to be cuts to some programmes in the Ministry of Defence.
Let me answer that.
Is he wrong about that?
As a government in this first year, we put an extra $5 billion into defence to respond to the threats that we face. We've made this commitment to increase defence funding 3 years earlier to 2.5%. And there will always be important management challenges in managing the budget, and people expect us, the public expect us, if they're going to support increased funding for defence, they want us to manage it well. And those are the sort of challenges that any department has each year.
But when a politician says challenges or important management decisions, what they mean is cuts. So was Tony Radakin right to say further cuts are likely to be required in the short term?
Tony Radakin was not right. We're managing the budget as the public would expect us to do, but we're also looking at this increased investment as a Labour government we've been willing to make, fully funded by switching difficult decision, money directly out of overseas aid, but we're doing that because we're facing new threats. We need a new era for defence. That's my job as Defence Secretary, to lead that change.
And is it worth tax rises then falling on the public in order to get to the amount of defence spending that you would like to by 2034? You know, you've spoken to us very candidly before about the dangers that we face as a country. The last time we spoke to you, you said that your increased investment was a message to Moscow about how seriously the UK is preparing for war. In that context, with the budget coming up, is it worth putting our taxes up so that we are safer as a country?
Well, first of all, we're dealing with the overhang of a previous government.
I'm asking about what you're going to decide.
And I'll come to that. That underfunded and hollowed out our armed forces, a defence programme that is underfunded, overcommitted, unsuited to the future.
And John Healey, we've spoken about that together many times.
Sure.
This is about what your government is going to do. Is it worth putting people's taxes up in order to be able to protect the country in the way that you as Defence Secretary would like to be able to do?
So in this Parliament, all our plans are fully funded, and that's a big contrast to any of the promises that were made before.
But the question is about the long term till 2034.
So After the next election in the 2030s, we've got an ambition to raise that to 3%. We, like all 32 nations in NATO, have made the commitment by 2035 that our overall security and defence spending will be up to 5%. That is a huge commitment, a strengthening of our deterrence with NATO allies that responds to the increasing aggression that we've had from Russia and that we see the increasing threats and uncertainty.
And it's a huge commitment that needs a huge check, but plainly this morning you're not going to tell us where that checkbook is going to be opened.
Well, what I am telling you this morning is that for housing, military housing, there's been an unfixed scandal for too long. We brought the homes back into public ownership. We're now today making that commitment of $9 billion investment over the next decade. That is more than double what was in the budget left by the last government.
OK, well, someone whose housing situation has changed this week is the former Prince Andrew. In the last few days, the King, as we know, made the decision to strip his brother of his royal titles. But Andrew was a member of the armed forces, and although he lost some of his military titles a couple of years ago, he has still been a Vice Admiral of the Navy. Will you allow that to stand?
Well, in general, the government's been guided by the decisions and judgments the King's made. In defence, it's exactly the same, and we've seen Andrew surrender the honorary positions he's had throughout the military. And guided again by the King, we are working now to remove that last remaining title of Vice Admiral that he has.
So he will be stripped of his remaining military title?
We're working with the Palace, we're working on that at the moment.
And in terms of his other military medals, he has a long list of medals, the South Atlantic Medal, the Silver Jubilee Medal, the list goes on. Should he return those military medals given everything that has happened?
Well, those are medals for his service. I don't have an update for you on that, but just as with his Vice Admiral rank and title, we would be guided by the decisions the King makes.
And for you, that decision has been taken. Why?
Which decision?
To remove his status as Vice Admiral of the Navy.
The King has indicated that's what he wishes. It is his last remaining military title, and it's hard to convey just how important the royalty and royal figures are when they have honorary positions and their connection with the military. It's a huge commitment that people in uniform make. They make it to the King, and they're massively proud to have the royals associated with their regiment or their squadron. And so this is a move that's right. It's a move that the King has indicated we should take, and we're working on that at the moment. OK, Secretary of State for Defence John Healey, thank you very much indeed for coming to see us this morning. It's always good to have you with us in the studio. And of course, next week is Remembrance Sunday, so we will have an extended programme with special coverage from the Cenotaph. As ever, remember, we want to know what you think of everything that's going on. You can email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or if you're social media inclined, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura K, and you can drop us a WhatsApp too. The number is 08000 282 161, and if you haven't yet signed up to our Thursday newsletter, you can do that by using the address on the screen there. Let's then stick to our main story this morning, the train attack in Cambridgeshire. Political reaction coming in from across the spectrum. Zia Yusuf from Reform UK is with us this morning. Thank you so much for coming in. I just wonder what you make of what we've seen this morning.
It's obviously a horrific tragedy. On behalf of myself, on behalf of Nigel, everyone at Reform, I want to issue out my sincere condolences to those affected, the victims and their families. Our thanks to the first responders who have clearly done a phenomenal job. And, you know, I think it is important to say, though, that any form of speculation at this point would be totally inappropriate. But I think it's reasonable to make this demand that, look, we don't know yet who these monsters were. We don't know why they did it. But what we ask of the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary is as soon as they have the answers to these questions, they share that with the British people. The British people can handle it. Truth and sunlight are the best disinfectant.
And the Defence Secretary has told us he expects the authorities to release that information as soon as they have it. We may indeed hear from the police before 10 o'clock while we are on air. Do you think that the government should look again at increasing security at stations?
It's a very difficult one. You know, I think imposing enormous friction in the day-to-day lives of people who are law-abiding, who are good people, as a result of the actions of a tiny minority is always a very difficult thing. I think it would be difficult to make such an assertion without having all of the facts.
But is it something that you would like the government even to consider? Would you be willing to think about it?
I think we've got to ask ourselves why we are in this situation where almost on a weekly basis it feels like people are being traumatised in this country by the fact that we have appalling knife crime. I think let's start with that, rather than starting with the idea of inconveniencing millions of law-abiding citizens. Why don't we implement stop and search? Something that all of the preponderant academic research, cross-culturally, all over the world shows if you do stop and search to saturation, deadly weapons of every sort get removed from circulation. Let's start with that, and that is how we keep British people safe.
The Home Office, though, this week actually said that knife crime has actually gone down, and according to the latest figures, and the latest figures for the NHS hospitals, of course, who admit people who have been victims, also show a 10% fall. Those are the very latest figures. Are you satisfied that the government is actually taking this seriously enough as a broader issue? No, and while it might be good that it's going down, assuming that those statistics can be relied upon, it's still far too high. I mean, it was only days ago, of course, and again, inappropriate to speculate about, the perpetrators of this horrific tragedy that we're talking about now, but it was only days ago that an innocent man was stabbed to death walking a dog. And that was, of course, by a man who had broken into the country, had come here on the back of a lorry, then granted, by the way, leave to remain by the previous Tory government. He should never have been in this country. And I want to make that point too. It is perfectly reasonable. Look, of course, everyone at Reform understands. Of course, British people commit crime. Of course, British people commit violent crime. We get all of that. But what is clear is that far too often, people who should never have been in the country at all are committing violent crime, who are committing sexual crime, who are committing murders. And the correct number of people doing such a thing is zero, Laura. We must secure our borders. We must retain our sovereignty. And it's important, though, to say to people at this point, we've got no reason to believe anything about the nature of these attackers. We simply don't know, and linking them.
But we do know the details of the one a few days ago, which is what I was
just reminding people that we don't know yet any details, and we'll bring them to people, of course, that we do. And very clearly, you and the Defence Secretary have said the authorities ought to give us that information on the ground as soon as they can possibly give it. Let's then talk about a different issue. It's the budget in a few weeks, and tomorrow Reform is going to come forward with some more of your new plans for the economy. You want to find savings, so what would you cut?
Well, the first thing is we need to restore the public finances, because the Tories over 14 years and Labour now have wrecked them. They have wrecked the public finances. And so we've got to ask ourselves, why is it that people watching this programme, year after year after year, their taxes go up? The Tories spent 14 years talking about fiscal prudence. Now they talk about living within our means. Of those 14 years, in every single one of those years, they ran a deficit. They spent more than the revenue they created. So they tripled the national debt. They tripled the national debt and blew up people's mortgages. Well, we've already outlined a number of things. Number one, let's talk about foreign aid. We will materially reduce foreign aid for the time being, because it's unacceptable that 15-year-olds in Wales 15-year-olds in the international PISA rankings have a lower educational attainment than 15-year-olds in Turkey, to whom the British taxpayer sends foreign aid every year. So that's number one.
So you'd cut foreign aid. What else would you cut?
Significantly, at least by 7 or 8 billion a year.
That's a very small amount of the overall budget. So what else would you cut?
Well, it's 7 or 8 billion pounds a year, which could go a long way. There's plenty of other things. So the second thing is the net zero costs, right? Billions of pounds of which are directly inside government budgets, and then the impact on the economy, Laura, because the UK has amongst the highest energy costs in the world. There is not a single example in human history of a fast-growing economy with high energy costs. So long as we have these insane net zero policies, we will have extremely slow, if basically no growth. GDP per capita, i.e. GDP per person, is currently growing at 0.3%. It's basically not growing at all. That has been the case for a number of years. I'll give you a few other ones. A few days ago, me and Lee Anderson, we gave a press conference. When Nigel's Prime Minister, we will ensure that those, let's talk about PIP payments and welfare. We only have one half of the welfare conversation in this country, which is ensuring those who need taxpayer support get it. That will continue under Reform, but we also must make sure that those who, for example, have low-level anxiety conditions are encouraged back to work.
Can you define that? Because lots of people watching will have heard your announcement earlier this week saying only people with serious anxiety would qualify for the payments that allow them to live and pay their bills if they don't feel able to work. So how would you define that?
Well, the defined term, according to the DWP, to use their term that we're talking about, is about 500,000 people who have anxiety disorders and mixed anxiety and depressive disorders. That's the DWP term. Now, without going into too much detail, because we don't have the time, we anticipate 10 to 20% of those 500,000 will be unable to work and would need to be recategorised. But there is a preponderance of academic research in countries like Holland, in countries like Norway,
so to be clear,
which make very clear for those people with mild anxiety, Laura, the best thing that you can do for them is encourage them back to work.
So for people who are claiming those payments right now because of what they believe is their problems with anxiety, you're saying that as many as 90% of them might lose those payments, for good or for ill. That's your figure.
Well, over a period of time, there'll be a period of transition, but we're also going to be investing. We're also going to be investing between £500 million and £1 billion in talking therapy for those people to get them back to work. And Laura, it's unacceptable. It's morally repugnant to just throw these people onto the scrap heap, especially young people, which is what's happening at the moment. We all know, I mean, everybody, so many people watching this programme understand this point, that we all feel anxious sometimes, right? And it's really important that those people are given the support to get back to work. And by setting your alarm clock before you go to bed and rising early, again, it's not just my take or Nigel's take, the preponderance of academic research shows the best thing you can do for those people, Laura, is encourage them back to work.
But just finally, you are going to give a big set of economic plans tomorrow, and we'll be able then to go through the numbers that you put into the public domain in more detail. But on principle, would you tax more or less than the current government on principle?
Well, the first thing we need to do is get the public finances under control.
Well, that's not my question, and we're very short on time. So on principle, would you tax more or less than the current government?
We're in favour of lower taxes. However, we have to be clear about this. The Labour government, for example, came in before the last election and said they were going to borrow around 40 billion. They're going to borrow more than twice that. By the end of this Parliament, the interest payments to service the national debt alone will be £4,000 per household. So the first thing, Laura, we've got to do is get public spending under control.
And only after you've done that could people expect tax rises?
Absolutely, absolutely.
OK, all right, so that's interesting. You've put that out there first. You want to get on top of things in your view, and then only after that would tax cuts come. OK. Well, Zia Yusuf, there's lots more we could talk about, but we're short on time today. But it's good to have you with us in the studio. And of course, the BBC will be covering those big announcements from Reform tomorrow. So let's go back to our panel. Plenty to talk about in terms of how the government's responding to this attack on the train. And of course, the news that John Healey gave us, Valentine, about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, as we must now call him, losing his remaining military title. What do you make of that? Is that a significant move?
It'll be a blow to Andrew because royals, and particularly Andrew, very kind of proud, very determined to hang on to military titles. It seems they are the king is intent on taking absolutely everything away from his brother. It's a flinty-eyed, Corleone-like ruthlessness he's displaying.
So the king's behaving like the mafia. I mean, you've spent your career as a royal observer. You know, you're a very distinguished royal correspondent. That's how you see this. This is Charles's revenge. Not revenge.
A desire, a need that he perceives to act firmly, swiftly, strongly and decisively. But the problem he faces, because it's all been a terrible distraction, that's how he views it, it's distraction from the good work the royal family is doing. But the problem is, even after doing this, even after drawing this clear line, Andrew is still going to be in the headlines and will continue to be so for a long time.
And he's still going to be living on a royal estate. I mean, Christina, I know you are not a fan of the fact that we have a monarchy in this country. Do you think this latest furore around Andrew might change the public mood?
Well, I would like to think it would. I mean, my view is that the royal family belongs to times past, not now. The fact that you would have a family who get all this privilege, wealth, purely by an accident of birth, I think is, long past its sell-by date. And they are just ordinary people, and you only have to see, any family, they have people who aren't particularly nice in their family. And that's a polite way of putting it.
The awkward uncle.
Yeah, the awkward uncle. I mean, I think lots of people will be thinking is, why is it taking the king so long, to be quite honest? I know that they're taking action now, but they've known about this for years. And a woman died. She took her own life because of something terrible that happened to her. Now, I know Andrew's always denied this, but the fact is there was, obviously a relationship with someone who was known to be a sexual predator, a sex offender, and the royal family should have clamped down on this a long time ago. And Andrew is still going to be protected because he's still going to get money from his brother, I presume. He, I'm sure, inherited lots and lots of money from his mother. And that's the thing. We don't even get to see the will. They don't pay tax on it. They don't pay inheritance tax on it. It's wrong.
Let's take a look, though, at public support. We've been looking at some of the numbers of what the public actually feels about the royals. And, you know, Jeremy, do you think that actually they might be able to just get through this once Andrew's sort of slightly out of the way?
I don't know. I mean, he's been buried alive. And I was amazed at what John Healey told you, that they're taking the last military honour away from him, but it's not enough for him to disappear. They want him humiliated. But I wonder whether the Americans will think, OK, we can now go for him. And I would reckon in the next 5 years he'll be in an American jail. I honestly,
you think he'll be in jail?
I think they'll start some extradition proceedings on him. Yeah, because now he has no protection. So they look at who's involved in all this. Ghislaine is in jail. Ghislaine Maxwell. Epstein is dead. You go through the list, and Andrew has had this royal protection, which is now gone. And that must be a signal to the FBI and others that they can now look into him properly.
Valentine, do you think that's realistic?
It's an apocalyptic scenario. You can't rule it out.
Fergie as well, by the way. I think Fergie as well.
Yeah, you can't rule it out, can you? I mean, if they go for Andrew, I mean, who will protect him? But there are an awful lot of high-profile American figures who are not being investigated with the same assiduousness that Andrew has been looked at.
And right now, how deep do you think the level of concern will be in the palace?
I think, well, that scenario, that probably hasn't even occurred to them. They are sincerely hoping that all this will go away. I mean, William, in particular, I think, has been looking very much for the future of the royal family. They have to reboot a bit, I think, because
I think he's like asbestos, basically. And with asbestos, you have to leave it in place because moving it is too dangerous.
Well, build a cupboard around it.
And they've now ripped it out, and we wait to see the effects of that.
Now, Christina, we were talking there to Zia Yusuf about reforms, economic policies. They're going to announce much more tomorrow. And of course, this is in the context of the budget and a huge pressure on Rachel Reeves, who had her own difficulties this week around her rental property. As a senior figure in the Labour movement, what's on your mind as this debate is really beginning to ramp up?
Big worries about reform, obviously. And I think it's interesting that he concentrated on, but didn't give any detail on how they would cut back on public finances, and he said get it back under control. I mean, what does that actually mean? If you look at the councils that they now run, they went in with lots of bluster on we're going to cut all sorts of things and save lots of money, and then they've come right up against the reality of the fact that local government doesn't have any money and there's nothing to cut. And so if you look at what they've actually achieved there, it's been next to nothing.
But if you look at what your government's doing, I don't know if you would call them your government, but you are a senior member of the Labour movement more broadly. I mean, people are far from convinced about what they're doing and their handling of the economy. I mean, one poll even put the Labour Party behind the Greens, I think, for the first time this week. What would you like them to do instead?
What I'd like them to do instead, I think that the past 15 months have been awful and there's been loads of own goals. But what I'd like them to do, and certainly in the run-up to the budget, is to look at changing their fiscal policy. They do need money to invest in public services. They do need money to invest in all the things that John Healey was talking about. But they need to change the fiscal policy, and I would argue that they need to tax those people who are best able to afford it. And, just if you put a 1% tax on people who own property and stocks and shares, etc., of over £5 million, that would raise about £10 billion a year. It's not a huge amount, but it would be a start. And there are lots of other taxes they could look at that would actually bring in additional funding.
I've got to say, we've had you here in the studio, on a regular occasion and on regular moments, because you are, well known in the Labour movement, but you sound that you're quite cross about what's been going on.
I think it's shocking what's been happening.
Shocking.
To be quite honest, I think people feel that they elected the Labour government 15 months ago. They expected it to change the way they feel about themselves. They expected to have more money in their pockets. And the sad thing about it is Labour have been doing some good things, but it's been masked. It's not getting talked about. And, you know, even just last week when Rachel Reeves was facing all the issue around her private rented home, they introduced a Renters Act last week, which gave so many more protections to people in rented accommodation. Didn't get mentioned.
And whose fault is it that it's shocking? Whose fault?
Well, it has to be the Labour government's fault, doesn't it? I mean, and it's also, I think, the fact that they've inherited a mess. I think that is true. And they're under huge
Why did they touch
scrutiny.
the winter fuel allowance? Because they just blew themselves up when they did that.
I've no idea
And you can
why.
see Reform have really moderated because they think, well, there are certain things that are too dangerous to do. So you've almost taken them to the centre because they don't want to make the same mistakes.
Yeah, and so it's not just the winter fuel allowance. There's been so many other own goals. I think you do have to wonder, you know, who's taking the decisions, who's dealing with the communication strategy. And I think it's time for a reset in Labour. It's time for the government to really look
And will
at
Keir
itself.
Starmer still be the leader of the Labour Party after the May elections?
Who knows? I don't know.
You don't know? Well, that is very significant that you say
Andy
you don't
Burnham?
know.
Well, no, I don't know because I don't know what will happen in May, and I don't know, depending on what happens in May, what Keir will feel about it, or indeed the Labour MPs will feel about it. I expect he will be, but I couldn't honestly guarantee it.
OK. We must leave it there. It's a lot to talk about this morning. We'll be back with you towards the end of the programme because we've been spending time this morning talking about the huge story that broke late last night. 10 people are in hospital after stabbings on a train on the East Coast main line yesterday. We will bring you more updates when we have it. We think here at the BBC that the police will be updating us at around 10 o'clock. If it's before then, of course, we will let you know. Now, on to other matters, because sometimes, not very often, but sometimes something weird happens and our politicians actually all agree. For years they did, and it was the law, still is, that the country needs to get to net zero by 2050. But that consensus has gone somewhat out of fashion. As we've heard from Reform already, they'd want to get rid of the targets, so do the Conservatives, and the high energy costs that pay in part for green subsidies, and that everyone feels, frankly. But it's into this complicated atmosphere that Nigel Topping has stepped as the new chair of the Climate Change Committee. It's an important job, and the job is to monitor the government's progress towards net zero. He came to see us yesterday for his first TV interview since taking on that big job.
I think the political consensus we used to have has been a real source of advantage, particularly in signalling to markets that there's going to be a consistency of policy. And, you know, when you're making investments that are going to last 10, 20, 25 years, having confidence and consistency of policy is super important. So, yes, I'm concerned. That's the main reason I stepped into this role, is knowing that this is now a contested domain. And what I want to make sure is that we're having a conversation about this transition that's based on facts and evidence, and, yes, alternatives. Because the alternative, and this is what our evidence shows that we provide to government in February this year, is that we can save a lot of money by moving towards this clean, green economy. And the alternative is to keep relying on very volatile overseas fossil fuels. Let's have a conversation about how we navigate this transition, which is happening, but at the level of evidence and alternatives, not just headlines.
And are you worried, therefore, that some politicians are just going after headlines and some politicians are completely ignoring the evidence?
I think there's plenty of time in the next 4 years before an election to have a proper conversation about this. We share all of our evidence and our advice with all the political parties, and in a few weeks I'll be reaching out to all the leaders of the political parties and saying, let's sit down and have a conversation. I want to hear, what is it you don't understand? What is it you don't agree with? What is it you think might be a better path? Because we think we've laid out in a very transparent and rigorous way our evidence, and we want to make sure that the conversation is based on evidence and that we want to have that conversation. Yes, I'm concerned with the fracturing of political consensus. I don't believe it's game over, and I think if we can keep sticking to the facts and keep looking at the economic costs and opportunities. You know, since our last advice, the net cost has halved because we've seen these continuing cost downs in these different technologies, and so we're in the period now where we start to see the benefit from the investment coming back to the economy in the next decade, and want to make sure that we see through that so that that goes on to the 2040s and 2050s.
But some politicians don't believe the facts on climate change, and some politicians in Reform even say that climate change isn't really happening. So what would you say to them?
Well, I'd say you might want to read some of the overwhelming scientific evidence and really look. You know, do you think this hurricane is not happening? You know, it's a terrible event, and we're seeing more of them and worse of them. We're seeing losses due to severe weather globally growing to 300 billion a year, only half of which is insured, and that number is growing faster than the global economy. So I think for most people, it's very clear that climate change is real, it's happening, it is having economic impacts. The question is, how do we navigate this transition, which has now become a technological transition as the costs of the clean technologies have continued to fall?
You've talked then about the economic benefits of sticking to this agenda rather than hesitating or even going backwards. For a lot of people, the costs are really, really enormous for them as an individual. So if you think, oh, I might want to get a heat pump, or I might even want to get an electric car, the costs are huge, not least when you also find out about the levies that go on your electricity bill in order partly, not completely, but partly to pay for some of the green transition. One of the ways to tackle energy bills might be switching the way that levies work. Do you think that the levy should be switched around or paid for somehow in a different way?
So our number one piece of advice to governments for the last 2 years has been, you've got to do something to bring the cost of electricity down relative to gas, so that switch from a gas boiler system at the end of life to a heat pump delivers real economic benefit in terms of reducing the cost of heating your home. And if governments get that right, then we'll see the market start to deliver clever tariffs and special offers. And we see a little bit of that already, but that's what will really drive the massive uptake of heat pumps in the next 20 years.
Do you, though, think if you take some of the extra charges off electricity bills, they'll just go onto our gas bills? So should we be ready for more expensive gas bills?
Well, that's for the government to decide. The ratio is important. Of course, if you just put everything on gas, so probably, you know, when we've run some scenarios in our latest advice, that probably you should take some off electricity into general taxation. Remember, we've paid a fortune in the last few years subsidising energy prices because they're set by the price of gas. So anything that can help accelerate us off a reliance on volatile gas prices. So yes, we need to reduce the ratio, but most importantly, take some of those levies off electricity prices.
And the COP summit provides a focus for leaders, big organisations to get together on climate change. But what about all of us? I think sometimes people are overwhelmed by this conversation and they wonder what they can do. So I wonder, what do you do? Do you drive an electric car? Do you have a heat pump? Do you always take the train? What do you do?
Well, I'm not taking the train to Brazil. I think there's a role for planes, right, in international diplomacy and commerce. But I do take the train all around UK. I live in Devon. I was in Edinburgh the other day. Took the train up there. We recently bought our first electric vehicle and just installed heat pumps. So yeah, and our cold, windy Dartmoor location is now a beautiful, warm, cosy home getting ready for Christmas.
And if you don't have the cash to buy an electric car or install a heat pump, what can you do?
Well, again, I say on the cars, wait. You know, I think we know more and more people are looking at and more people are buying electric vehicles. Of course, the government now has provided a subsidy. The cost of those cars continues to come down. So at some point in the next 5 to 10 years, anyone buying a first-hand or second-hand car will find that the electric option is cheaper to buy and cheaper to run. But heat pumps, as we said, it's more complicated. We're hoping to see some movement in the Warm Homes Plan, which the government will publish later this year, on our number one recommendation to government, which is take some of the levies off electricity to reduce the price of electricity relative to gas. But also, of course, the government is currently subsidising heat pumps to the tune of £7,500. So as you come to the next replacement of your boiler, take a good look at it. Take a good look at the subsidies that are available. Take a good look at the impact of reduced electricity prices, which I hope we'll see in the next couple of months.
OK, Nigel Topping, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Well, it will be interesting to see what happens at that big climate summit in the next couple of weeks. Let's, however, return to our main story here at the BBC this morning, the terrible attack on the train from Doncaster to London King's Cross. We'll hear more from one of the eyewitnesses, Ren Chambers, who was a passenger.
I saw someone who was very badly injured, lots of blood around them. They were either collapsed or looking about, they were about to fall over. And people were trying to pass back hoodies and things to pack the wound. And then I found my dad, I was like, this happened, and I made sure that someone called services, whatever else, and there was a girl next to me who was near where the first stabbings happened, and she said that the man on the floor stepped in front of her and then got a stab to the neck.
A terrifying experience. Well, we can speak to the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, from her home in Essex this morning. Thank you so much for joining us today on this big breaking story. Now, this attack, Huntingdon, it's not far from your constituency. Is there any extra information you can give us today?
No, I don't know more than what I've heard on your programme. You're right, it is very close to my constituency. We're on the Cambridgeshire border here in northwest Essex. And all I can say is that everyone here is absolutely horrified at what's happened and also terrified. Just listening to that account that we've just heard, I can only imagine how frightening it must have been to have been in an enclosed environment with someone rampaging in that fashion. And my thoughts, of course, are with the victims, those people who have suffered very severe, probably life-threatening injuries. And also praise for the emergency responders. I know that there was a very strong operation by the British Transport Police. I spoke to Paul Bristow and Ben Obese-Ejekti, the local MP myself. They're very pleased with the response. We're glad to see that the state system functioned in those circumstances, but my heart goes out to those victims.
So at this stage, you are satisfied with the approach that the authorities are taking? There has been a little confusion where the code word Plato, which designates a terror attack, was said at the scene, but was then withdrawn.
Yes, no, I am satisfied. When these things happen, there's understandably a lack of information and some confusion. I would expect the security services and the police to assume the worst case scenario, and if that's not happening, scale back. I don't expect that in those circumstances everything is going to go absolutely right and perfect, but it looks like they know what they're doing. The speed with which they were able to respond, I think, should also be praised. Many of the things that we're all worried about is that if we're in those circumstances, no one comes to help. And the fact that the police were there to help is fantastic. That is what we want to see. And in particular, knowing that passengers also were protecting each other. The story of the man intervening and then getting stabbed in the neck, I mean, absolutely horrific, but he must be a very, very brave individual to have done that. He protected someone else's child, someone's family, and I pay extra special tribute to him.
What should be the first priority, in your view, at this moment?
The first priority should be to understand exactly what has happened, what led to this incident, swift arrest, which looks like it's happened, of any perpetrators, and hopefully a very speedy transition through the justice system. But I know many people will be asking the same questions that I'm thinking of right now, which is, why is it that despite so much activity, so much done, legislation to ban knives, so much investment in mental health, so much more, we're seeing more and more violence on our streets? How can we protect ourselves? What is causing this? Lots of people will be speculating. I think we should wait until more facts emerge. But there's clearly something going wrong in our society right now, which I believe all politicians of all parties need to have a conversation about. We saw that attack in West London just last week. We cannot be a country where people are innocently going about their business and facing this level of violent crime. It's abhorrent, and it's not something that we used to see before. What is causing it?
It's good of you to join us this morning on this big breaking story, but by chance it's also your anniversary from the day of you're taking over as the Conservative leader. Why is your party less popular than when you arrived?
Laura, we've had this conversation before. We know that the Conservative Party suffered a historic defeat. And right now, what we're seeing is political fragmentation. Lots of people are going to protest parties. After the first year, I think the landscape is becoming clearer. Opposition is not something that takes time, you come out of very quickly. The last few oppositions have been 14, 13 and 18 years. What I want to make sure is that people understand what the Conservative Party stands for. We're the only party that is both credible enough, competent enough and tough enough to do the things that will get a stronger economy and stronger borders. Of course, we've made mistakes. I've acknowledged those. That's why I've changed the party policy on various things like net zero to immigration. We're leaving the Convention on Human Rights. We did everything we could to stop the boats, None of it worked. The legal system kept being used against us. We've got to be tougher. And that's the message that I'm going to be taking up and down the country. Now people know where we stand and what we will do.
OK, Kemi Badenoch, thank you very much indeed for joining us on a big morning of news. It's good of you to give us your time. Thank you very much indeed. So, Jeremy, happy anniversary to Kemi Badenoch.
I mean, I did one year I thought it was 10.
You thought it was 10?
Well, she's been through
cheeky mood this morning.
She's been through it. I love there's no congratulations from an interviewer, is there, ever? So she's like immediately hit with the thing of, why does nobody like your party? I think, she's on the night shift. That's how William Hague described it when he did this period. She knows she's never going to be Prime Minister unless something very weird happens.
Is that fair?
I think she's...
Do you think that's fair?
How can they win the next election when they're behind Labour and Reform and even the Greens, the last poll? But it's not really her fault. I think she's doing a good enough job in the circumstances. It's like driving a car without an engine.
Valentine, that was an excellent raise of the eyebrow, just in case the cameras didn't catch it.
But it makes the next election fascinatingly uncallable, because we don't know whether she'll be leader of the Conservatives. We don't know if Keir Starmer will be in place.
Courtesy of Christina this morning.
The one thing we do know is that Nigel Farage will be leader of Reform.
Well, do we even know that? Because he's changed his mind about things before. Christina.
He's almost the same age as you. I mean,
Christina.
Well, I could see him being seduced to go off to the States and do something there or somewhere else. I mean, money seems to be the driving factor in his life. So I wouldn't bet on him still being the leader of Reform. And I think if he goes, that will have a massive impact on Reform.
But who would your party be scared of if it wasn't Kemi Badenoch?
That's a hard one. I mean, can I just say I'm a member of the party, but I'm not in the leadership of the Labour Party.
I think you made that quite clear this morning.
Who would Labour be scared of? And the Tories? Hard to say, because, I mean, I'm probably like loads of other people. I probably couldn't name more than half a dozen Tory politicians, to be quite honest. And none of them seem to me people who would inspire the public. So I can't...
Truss.
Well, I mean, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? When we were listening to the Mr. Yusuf earlier, and he was talking about the Tories. I mean, they backed Liz Truss's budget.
But if you say none of the Conservatives that you can see in front of you would inspire the public, who in the Labour Party would inspire the public? Because it's clear you don't think Keir Starmer's inspiring the public.
No, I think Keir can inspire the public going forward if they get the policies right. But the moment they've not got the policies right. And I think that's the big issue for Labour, is it seems that we're talking ourselves into a one-term government. And actually what they need to do is start to focus on what they had in their manifesto, which is things that would make a difference to people's lives, investing in public services, investing in industry, giving people, making sure that the cost of living is their top priority.
And there are lots of new entrants to the market, though. I mean, Jeremy, whether that's, Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana on the left trying and not having a great success so far at getting their new party going, but Zach Polanski, the new Green leader, making making a big impression.
I think it's a big problem for Keir Starmer is that there will be lots of seats where you have this extra left-wing vote going on Gaza, you've got the Greens, etc. I think that's a problem for him as well. But then he's tacking to the right to try and catch up with Reform.
Big mistake.
You think so?
I think it's a huge mistake. I think they'll lose their traditional voters if they tack to the right. What they have to be doing is coming out with policies that actually help working people in this country, because that's what will make a difference.
Or else Jeremy's going to need a new swingometer with different colours on it.
Will it be Angela Rayner at the next election?
I'd like to see Angela back in some sort of senior position. I think we really missed that authentic voice that she brought, and I hope that by the time we have another election, she'll be one of the front, up front somewhere.
Okay, well, it's time to put our crystal balls away, but it's been great to have you with us this morning on a very busy day of news, and there is shortly going to be, we expect, an update for the press at Huntingdon Station. You can see there cameras and journalists starting to gather. We're expecting the police to give us the very latest in the next few minutes on the awful attack on the train. Of course, stay with the BBC throughout the day, because we'll bring that to you live, and all the twists and turns of that terrible story as everyone this morning tries to absorb what happened on that train. It is now almost 10 o'clock, so a big thanks to my trio at the desk and to all of our guests today. And interestingly, a reminder of another big story that happened here. The Defence Secretary John Healey told us that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor will be stripped of his last military title, the Vice Admiralty of the Navy, no more. So there'll be plenty more on the BBC about that attack on the train, that press conference we expect in the next few minutes. And there's also advice on the BBC website about the impact this is having on travel. So if you're on the move today, do check that out. We will be back next week with a special programme for Remembrance Sunday. So I will look forward to seeing you very much then next week, same time, same place.